Hello there. It is Wednesday again. Man, it comes around faster and faster every week, doesn't it? Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, Real Estate Live Chat Day. What are we going to talk about today? That's sometimes is the question of the morning. Oh yeah,
I know. We need you guys. We need your help letting us know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about. One of the questions we do get asked a lot, though, is what's happening in the market? Excuse me. What are we seeing different? What are we from just 6 months or so ago? And one thing that's been coming up a lot lately, and I've been talking about this with Matt in particularly, agents on our team, and also other agents in the industry, just home inspections. There for a while, home inspections, people were still doing them. Some people weren't, which we don't ever recommend, but they were doing them, but they were looking at them legitimately as, okay, got this home inspection. Here's a list of the things that they've noted. I'm good with it. There's nothing on here devastating. Still buying it. Let's move on.
Nothing's going to keep me from buying a house, or this is a major issue that we did not see.
That we did not see, and we don't want to buy the house. So that's what we were seeing, and quite frankly, that's really what that contingency is more designed to do. And I think some people get a little bit confused by the inspection contingency and the way that it's written in the contract. And I think some people don't even probably read the full contract, which you should absolutely always read the full contract. I've read it from back to front a billion times, and Matt has too. But so we're just going to take a little bit of time today to talk about inspections and that particular contingency in a real estate transaction. Obviously, when you're buying something, you want to know what you're buying, right? So what we recommend when we go to look with our buyers is look at everything really, really well. And if you think you want to buy something, it's not a bad idea to go back and check it out a second time. Now, we know in markets in the past, you weren't having time to look at them barely once, much less twice, but our market now has slowed a bit to where you can take a little bit more time to look at the houses, which we always recommend. So Matt, share some of the things that, like, I know some things that I look at when I'm looking at a house for my clients. Say, hey, did you look at this? Or I noticed that while they're looking at cabinets and countertops and all the pretty stuff,
right? We're
looking at different stuff. So what's some of the stuff that you kind of look for?
I'm gonna look for some of the big, larger ticket items. Because everything on a house has to be maintained or replaced or worked on at some point, right? So your roof, your windows, your water heater, heat and air unit, some of the flooring, for instance, or bathroom type fixtures, different things like that. Those are things that do wear out eventually and can cost some money. So I want to look at those, and if a heat and air unit is on its last leg, it's hard to even tell how old one is. But generally speaking, and this isn't scientific, but look at the outside of it. If it's really, really bad, faded and rusted, that condensing unit outside, that's a good sign that it's probably pretty old. And some units will run for 10 years. Some units we've seen run just fine for 25 years. So there's no real science to that, but just be aware that if it's older, that is something that will probably be replaced at some point. So just
something to plan for. And it's one of those things, like, you don't need to have a home inspection or a home inspector to come out and look at the HVAC and tell you it's 20 years old. You can look at the HVAC. There's a manufacturer date on there, and like Matt said, just by looking at it, you can tell if it's older. And when you make your offer, that should be taken into consideration, because it's highly unrealistic to ask a seller to replace a working HVAC. Like, this thing's old, we want it replaced, we don't care if it's working great. That's not a realistic request necessarily. So you kind of need to think about, before you offer on the property, okay, we're going to have to in some shape, form, or fashion plan for an HVAC replacement at some point in the near future. And so you take that into consideration. So maybe it's asking the seller to pay for a home warranty. It'll cover the house for a year. That way, if that HVAC went out in the first year, that it would cover the bulk of the cost, and so that there are ways to do that without saying, hey, Mr. Seller, spend X number of dollars because you've got an old HVAC. So you have to be realistic in the things. And I think as a buyer, it is important to look at these things ahead of time before making an offer. You're excited, you want the house. your home inspection and negotiations there is not supposed to be a renegotiation of things that you didn't look at good when you were there originally. And we're seeing a lot of that lately. The bulk of the aggravation for buyers and for sellers in the transaction from contract to close right now is this home inspection section. And quite honestly, it can be avoided. If buyers, you are doing your due diligence on the front end before writing an offer on a property, and sellers, you're aware of the items that need to be taken care of in the house ahead of time. So we can talk about that a little bit too. But
and also one other thing to touch on, let's just say your budget is whatever it is. You have a $300,000, $400,000 budget.
Okay.
And so if you're going in and you're looking at houses that are $400,000, but you really don't feel like you're going to have time or money down the road to replace a heating air unit, should you be looking at houses that are 30 years old, or that have not been recently remodeled?
That's a good point.
Or should you go maybe a little bit smaller house for that same budget, but something a lot newer, so you're not going to have the maintenance, in the near future?
Well, and that's another good thing to talk about too, just talking about the age of houses. So if you've ever read that section of the contract that talks about home inspections and what the expectation there is, and a lot of your home inspectors will really hyperfixate on codes. This is not per code, and I've heard people use that term out of context a billion times in our industry. It's not per code. Well, what does that even mean? What code are you talking about? The code of conduct?
Well, the
code in my garage door? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
So what they're referring to, I assume they're referring to, is building codes. Now, Matt, you can tell us all about building codes, because there is no way that.
So realistically, what the contract says is the house is supposed to be per code of when it was built.
For the time it was built. So if it's a 1950s home, per that contingency, it needs to be per code for 1950.
It don't matter because it wasn't any codes back
then. Exactly. Case in point. So you have to understand that and it specifically says in the contract, seller is not required to bring the home up to code, building code, per today's time. You could spend more than what the house is worth trying to bring a historic.
And who knows what that even is? Because today maybe 2023, but most municipalities right now are operating off of 2018 code.
So explain that. The codes change every year. They update them in some shape, form, or fashion.
And then different municipalities will update certain versions of a new code, but not the others. And it's even when we're building brand new today, building in this city or this county, and then going one city over, one county over, we have different codes we have to work with.
Right.
And different interpretations of codes. So there's really no way hardly of going back 20 years and say, okay, what was the code back then in this particular area for this house?
Right. Because they're different. They vary from city to city, from county to county. And so for a home inspector to come in and say this is not per code, what does that even mean? Like, so you need to be educated on what that means. And I've seen people walk through houses. Oh, this thing can't be up to code. Up to what code? Like Morse code? It's really that terminology is thrown around really loosely in our industry, and and used incorrectly all the time. So just know that what that inspection contingency does cover are safety issues, structural issues, and things that are legitimately broken. Like, this does not function. Broken. It looks like it could be broken really soon because it's old. Broken. Like, it doesn't work. Because I've had this going back to the HVAC. Oh, this thing's is past its life expectancy, which is exactly what it'll say in the home inspection.
But
is it functioning?
And a home inspector is more like a general practitioner, not
that's
an
where
expert at anything.
That's where I was going with this. Okay, that's where I was going with this.
So he could say, I recommend you hire an HVAC professional to come in and let them check it.
Right. So
that's on the buyer's dime.
Yeah. So here's another misconception, and where people are uneducated on home inspectors. When you go to buy a house, it would be almost impossible to get a GC, a roofer, an HVAC guy, an electrician, a structural engineer and everybody out to inspect this house for you. So the idea behind a home inspector and home inspection is to have one person go out with a limited amount of knowledge of a lot of different things and note anything that looks like it might be of concern, and then compile a report based on that. Just a general assessment of the house. And then you take that general assessment of the house, knowing that that home inspector is not a licensed HVAC contractor. They're not a licensed roofer. They're not a licensed contractor. They're not a structural engineer. They can't deem that a house is structurally unsound. They are not licensed to do that. They are licensed to say there's settlement cracks in places that are typically not seen. You might want to have this looked at by a licensed professional in that field. And that's where we would say, okay, yeah, he's noted that these cracks are in odd places, these settlement cracks. Maybe we should hire in a structural engineer to deem if this house does actually have structural damage, or if it has structural issues, or if it doesn't. And I'll tell you, in my almost 20 years of doing this, we've had structural engineers come out and investigate several different situations. And 99.9% of the time, they're of no concern. There's not even much to do to even repair them. They're normal settle. Now, there are a handful of times where there are things that need to be done, but the house is not falling in. So I think it's important to understand what your home inspector is licensed to do and not licensed to do. Now, is that to say that that there aren't certain home inspectors that are outside, that blow outside of their level of licensure? Probably. I mean, we don't recommend any of those guys. But it's important to know that is just a guide to things. So you may have 10 things on there that you're concerned about, and then you have the people licensed in that actual field come out to look at them, and none of them is anywhere near of the concern that you thought initially. So I guess my thing on that is take that home inspection with a grain of salt and look at it and know what it is, and then move on from there to inspect things further that need to get in specific fields.
Yeah, if he says something doesn't necessarily look right about this, or you may have some, then we go, and that's not on the seller's responsibility. That's on the buyer. Says, okay, I'm going to have my roofer or my plumber go look at this, or whatever. Something else the home inspector does provide that's not necessarily whether something is good or bad, but you will use this down the road, is they're going to document what size water heater you have, how old it is, where it is it gas or electric? So 3 years from now, all of a sudden your water heater goes out, you call a plumber, and you can say, okay, well, I can look up my home inspector that here it's in the garage, it's whatever. It just makes things a lot easier for that reference to have that information.
Yeah, I mean, he is to going through your house from top to bottom, and he's noting everything that's in it. And that is super duper helpful. If you hang on to that, you can reference back to that. I mean, it is a really helpful, super helpful report. I think it's just understanding the contingency and understanding the scope of work that the home inspector's hired to do. I've heard people over the years, my home inspector did a terrible job. There was this, and this, and that's the thing about things that are broken. I mean, they're working one day and the next day they're not. Like that's how things break. Like, and it's not to say that it was missed. I mean, maybe it was functioning at that time and then it was functioning later, but I think it's important as a buyer to take responsibility in the fact that this is a home that you're buying. It's an expensive investment. And for you to take pains in looking at things carefully, figuring out things that are important to you, not important, and then really understanding the home inspector's scope of work and their capabilities and what they're capable of doing and incapable of doing. And then, being able to dig into that and there's a responsibility there of the buyer themselves to dig deeper if there's concerns. And as the real estate professionals, we try to help, guide in that direction and help connect you with other professionals if you need to look further. But something else I'm seeing right now, in particularly is buyers coming in and quickly making offers and then thinking that inspection negotiation is a renegotiation of the price no matter what comes back on the home inspection report. And I think what buyers also have to understand is you're hiring a home inspector to find things wrong with that house. And he works for you, and you've hired him and you've paid him. And they can put all kinds of things on that report that may or may not be accurate, and so that report is for you. And so we're seeing lately a lot of times buyers are wanting to send a home inspection report that they paid for to a seller and saying, fix all this stuff. Well, that seller is not, per the contract, they're not required to fix anything other than termite damage. If there's termites, they have to treat for that. That is in the contract. But outside of that, they're not required to make any repairs. So to assume that a seller would do that, not to mention that you really don't give that report to the seller because that was something you had done for your own knowledge. Now, I have had sellers that will go do home inspection reports before they list the house, fix everything on the list, and then provide it to the buyer. That's a great way to be a proactive seller. Whenever we sell our personal houses, we do home inspections on every one of them before we sell them, fix every item on the list, compile a little booklet, hand it to every buyer that walks through the door. Now, will they re-inspect? Probably. That's okay. No problem.
And that other inspector may find something else. He may find one plug that's not working or something.
Yeah, or something, or something that broke between the time that you had that inspection and then, but it's usually pretty minimal. And so that is a way that sellers can really be proactive on their end. But what we're seeing right now, if you're asking like kind of what's a big stink in the market right now, is the home inspection and resolution period have really been an unpleasant place for buyers and sellers right now. It's like kind of arguing back and forth. And I think on the buyer side, it's a lack of education, whether it be by their agent or not reading, the contract. And then on the sellers, sometimes it's a lack of being proactive on their end, or maybe a lack of maintenance. They didn't maintenance the house in certain areas, so the home inspector comes in and just tears it up because gutters are full and downspouts are disconnected, and we don't have termite contracts, and so it's not a seller's fault or a buyer's fault either way, but there are certain things on both ends that I think education and being proactive can help you move through that section of the contract a lot quicker. And then understanding what you're buying, in particularly old houses, historic houses, really in particularly, it's a whole different ballgame. Matt and I we've sold tons of historic houses. When I say historic, I mean like 1900s, like, didn't have heat and air and electricity at all when they were first built. Those houses are still standing 100 years later, so that's going to be a different inspection than your new build from 5 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about that? And some of the experiences we've had with historic houses. To send in a home inspector that's not familiar with historic houses could be a pretty big disaster.
It could be a little bit overwhelming for the inspector too, probably, because if they're used to newer stuff and going through and trying to find anything in a newer house, and little stuff, they go through that. You could go through an old house as the home inspector. If you're really picky, you can find all kinds of stuff, great, but it's not really necessarily structural or safety or whatever. It's just the way it was done back then.
Right.
And the way it's old, the windows are old, they're probably gonna be painted shut,
right.
They probably won't open, that's just what to be expected.
Right. It's historics. And if they've been renovated over the years, trying to, they've obviously been renovated multiple times over the years from when they built 100 years ago. So trying to get electricity, water, HVAC systems into these houses, there's a different way of doing those types of things. And I think one of the big things that we run into, I'd say for us, Matt, that we've ran into for over the years, of where inspectors and buyers have asked for things and we've had to bring out professionals. It's almost to just say, there's nothing wrong with this. It's electrical type stuff.
Yeah, lots of that.
Lots of electrical type stuff, which if you see something that looks like it might be an electrical issue, you obviously think safety. So that would be something you would think to request to be repaired if that's the route that your contract is showing that you can go. But just keeping in mind that, again, sometimes home inspectors will note things that they think Mike could be, and then the electrician comes out and is like, this is fine, there's nothing wrong with it. So that's another thing. And I think you brought this up earlier. I see sellers buyers coming in and saying this HVAC is older, make sure it stays serviceable, and then they put on the home inspection or the repair request, service HVAC. No, that's not really a legitimate repair request, but there's nothing wrong with it. You're wanting them to service it. If there's nothing wrong with it, it's functioning correctly, it's not really within that realm of that home inspection contingency. That's really not something the seller is required to do.
It's like saying, I need to put new mulch down in your landscape.
Yeah. So another thing, and it is very specific in there that doesn't cover cosmetic stuff, cosmetic items. If you go and look at a house and the deck needs to be stained and you're concerned about it, that should be addressed in the initial contract. You don't need the home inspector to come out and tell you that the deck needs to be stained. And then you stick it on on a repair proposal, and the seller's going, you could see that. So what we try to focus on and encourage our buyers to focus on are sight unseen issues, safety issues that are sight unseen, and then stuff that's legitimately broken. Like the hot water heater is not working. Okay. It needs to be repaired or replaced depending on what's wrong with it. It's not functioning like it should, or not functioning at all. So if you stick to those guidelines and you move and you work, everybody's working towards the end goal. The home inspection section is not where you're supposed to get the seller, or you see how much money you can get out of them. That's not acting in good faith. That's really an unethical way to look at that. You're supposed to be looking for things that are legitimately wrong with the house to decide if you really want to buy it or not. And the seller's not required to make any repairs at all. Now, you might be able to negotiate some things. If there's a leak underneath the sink, the seller's probably going to fix that, whether you buy the house or not. That's a legitimate repair. I don't know if you've got other examples of that, but
there's a million different things. And so regardless if you're buying or selling, let's talk about it. What's the call? Let's talk about what's it look like? Should I get one if I'm selling? Should I get one before? Should I not? What
are the pros and cons of that? And we can guide you through that for sure.
And as we're buying, what do we need to look for before we put the contract in? But we'll be happy to talk with you about any of that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Keep us in mind. And
yeah, for sure. I hope this has been helpful. We always want to bring you information that is empowering you with knowledge. You feel like knowledge is power. And so sometimes it's just people don't know. And so we always try to bring you information that'll be helpful for you. If you know somebody buying or selling, or you're buying and selling, please give us a call. Even if you're not thinking about doing it now, but maybe later, or you just have questions, feel free to call us. We're happy to help in any way. And we're always glad to come to you on our Wednesday.
And we'll see you next Wednesday.